We need to talk about something that Donald Trump, and frankly, the entire political elite in Washington, has failed to grasp. And when they finally do understand it, as economist Richard Wolff has just brilliantly exposed, it will be far too late. There is a secret about Donald Trump. A secret that the mainstream media, in its daily obsession with drama, theater, and scandal, refuses to see. They are mesmerized by the performance, by the spectacle, but they fail to see the machinery turning behind the curtain. They do not understand the function he serves. What no one in the media dares to say aloud is this: Trump's true secret, the thing that defines his presidency and his current campaign, is not his strategic brilliance, nor his supposed madness. It is his profound, almost childlike, denial of reality. Donald Trump is the ultimate personification, the clearest symptom, of the terminal decline of the American empire. And the endgame that Professor Wolff points to is not just the endgame for Trump the man, or Trump the politician. It is the endgame for the very illusion he has been forced to sell. It is the endgame for the idea that the United States can simply bully, tariff, and sanction the world back into the submission of the 1990s. That time is over. Let me say something that no one in the United States, whether in the Democratic or Republican Party, dares to acknowledge: America is in denial. The empire has no clothes, and Donald Trump is the man shouting loudest about how magnificent his invisible robes are. This is the central thesis we must understand, the thesis that the critical compass has been presenting, in which Wolff's analysis only reinforces: the American empire is in decline, but its elites, from Joe Biden to Donald Trump, are in profound psychological denial. The old tools of empire, the tools they used for 70 years to manage the globe, simply do not work anymore. Military threats are being ignored. The power of the dollar is being challenged. And sanctions and tariffs, their favorite economic weapons, are now shooting themselves in the V. While Washington is trapped in this cycle of denial, in this political theater where Trump is the lead actor, a new world is being built. A multipolar world. The BRICS, China, Russia, and sovereign nations of the global south are quietly building an alternative system. A system that does not require Washington's permission. A system that makes the American drama, frankly, irrelevant. The secret being exposed is that Trump has no solution for this. He is the problem. He is denial in human form. Let's analyze the evidence. Let's look at what Donald Trump has actually done and what he promises to do. Let's focus, for a moment, not on the theater, but on the real-world consequences of his policies. This is Act 3, the economic collapse they themselves are accelerating. The first proof of Trump's denial, and perhaps the most obvious, is his obsession with tariffs. Trump operates under a 19th century worldview. He genuinely believes, in a way that is almost touching in its simplicity, that if he places a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, or 10% on the rest of the world, it is China or Mexico that will pay for it. Richard Wolff, and frankly any first-year economics student, knows this is an absolute falsehood. It is an economic lie. Tariffs are not paid by the exporter. They are paid by the importer. When Trump imposes a tariff on Chinese products, it is not President Xi who writes the check. It is Walmart. It is Apple. It is Target. It is the small American businesses that rely on components. And what do those companies do? They pass the cost, penny for penny, onto the American consumer. Trump's trade war was never a war against China. It was, and always will be, a war against the American worker. It was a massive tax on the middle class and the poor. Think of the irony. Think of the profound cognitive dissonance. Trump was elected, in large part, by the Rust Belt. By workers in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, who saw their manufacturing jobs disappear over the last 3 decades. He promised to bring the jobs back. And what did he do? He started a trade war that raised the cost of living for those exact workers. He raised the cost of cars, of appliances, of tools. And worse, when China retaliated with its own tariffs, as it obviously was going to, it targeted American products. It targeted Midwestern soybeans. It targeted Detroit-made automobiles. Trump's tariffs not only failed to bring the jobs back, they actively destroyed the demand for the few products the United States was still exporting competitively. It is an act of economic self-mutilation. It is like trying to cure a broken arm by amputating a leg. And here is the endgame that Wolff identifies: Trump has learned nothing. He is promising to do it all over again, only harder. He promises universal tariffs. He is telling us, openly, that his plan to save the economy is to make it less competitive, to raise inflation, and to isolate the United States from the rest of the world. This is not strength. This is desperation. It is the admission that the neoliberal model, which the United States itself forced the world to adopt, has failed so spectacularly at home that the only solution they can imagine is to build a wall around their own collapsing economy. The second proof, which is intrinsically linked to the first, is the denial of competitive reality. The secret of Trump, and of Biden as well, is that they do not have a plan to innovate. They only have a plan to block. Let's look at the clearest example: electric vehicles. China, through companies like BYD, is not just catching up to the West. It is dominating the global EV market. They are producing better cars, with superior battery technology, at a fraction of the price of American or European competitors. This is market reality. This is capitalism in action, the very system the United States told the world was the only path. And what is the response of the empire in denial? What is Donald Trump's response? It is to ban BYD. It is to propose 100% tariffs. It is to scream about unfair competition and Chinese subsidies, while ignoring the decades of massive subsidies the U.S. has given its own industries, from oil to agriculture to the banks. When Trump calls for tariffs on Chinese EVs, he is not being a tough negotiator. He is publicly admitting defeat. He is telling the entire world, our auto industry, the big three in Detroit, can no longer compete. They have failed. And instead of forcing them to innovate, instead of investing in R&D, we are going to use government power to protect their mediocre profits and force the American consumer to buy inferior, more expensive products. This is protectionism in its most pathological state. It is not protecting the worker, it is protecting lazy monopoly capital. It is the empire choosing stagnation over competition, because it knows it can no longer win the game it created. And finally, the third and most dangerous proof of the collapse: the abuse of the dollar weapon. For decades, America's greatest export was not Hollywood movies or Boeing airplanes. It was the dollar. The entire world needed dollars to buy oil, to trade, and to hold in their reserves. This gave Washington extraordinary power. The power to print money from nothing to fund its wars and its deficit, and the power to exclude any nation from the global financial system with the flip of a switch. This tool, sanctions, was the empire's ultimate weapon. They believed in Washington, both the Democratic hawks and Trump's nationalists, that this weapon was invincible. And so, they overused it. They sanctioned Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. And then, in their final act of hubris, they tried to sanction Russia, one of the largest resource economies in the world. They froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian reserves. They tried to destroy the ruble. And what happened? As Richard Wolff has been patiently explaining, it backfired spectacularly. Russia did not collapse. Its economy, after an initial shock, reoriented. It turned east. It began selling its oil and gas to China and India, not in dollars, but in yuan and rupees. But the real damage was not to Russia. It was to the trust in the dollar. When the United States froze Russia's reserves, it sent a clear message to every other nation on the planet: your money is not safe with us. If you step out of line, if you disagree with our foreign policy, we will steal your savings. What do you think Saudi Arabia, Brazil, India, or even nervous allies thought that day? They realized the dollar was not a neutral asset. It was a political weapon. And they began, quietly and methodically, to look for an exit. Donald Trump, in his denial, sees none of this. He sees sanctions as a tool of strength. He promises more sanctions. He threatens to sanction Europe for trading with Iran. He threatens to sanction China for trading with Russia. He doesn't understand that every time he does this, he isn't punishing China. He is giving China one more reason to accelerate the development of its alternative payment system, CIPS. He is giving the BRICS one more reason to create a common reserve currency. He is, literally, accelerating the very process he fears most, de-dollarization. This is the end game. The empire is destroying the very foundation of its power, the dollar, in a desperate attempt to punish those who no longer obey. Trump is the captain of the sinking ship, screaming orders for the crew to haul more water on board, convinced that this will somehow make the ship float. Trump's secret, exposed by Wolff and obvious to anyone who looks at the facts, is that he has no plan. He is a man of the past, applying failed solutions from the past to a new world he cannot, or refuses to, understand. He is stuck in the first act of his own tragedy, while the rest of the world is already moving on to the finale. And while the empire busies itself shooting at its own feet, what is the rest of the world doing? They are not waiting. They are not asking for permission. They are building. This is the other half of the equation, proof B, the rise of the multipolar world. And it is here that the denial of Donald Trump, and the entire Washington political class, becomes truly tragic. They are so obsessed with their own internal drama that they are not seeing the world's new operating system being installed right under their noses. Let's start with BRICS. For years in the West, BRICS was treated as a joke. An acronym invented by a Goldman Sachs banker. A talking shop for disparate nations. That joke is over. Let's look at the facts that the critical compass has repeated and which are now undeniable. Today, the BRICS bloc, measured in purchasing power parity, PPP, is already economically larger than the G7. Let me repeat that. The bloc led by China and Russia has already surpassed the bloc led by the United States. And with the historic expansion, BRICS Plus, bringing in energy giants like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, and regional powers like Egypt and Ethiopia, this bloc now controls a staggering portion of the world's energy resources and global trade routes. But it's not just about size. It's about infrastructure. While the United States, under Trump and Biden, argues about walls and fails to fix its own crumbling bridges and railways, BRICS has built real financial institutions. The new development bank, the BRICS Bank, is actively funding infrastructure projects in local currencies. It was created as a direct alternative to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, institutions that used the dollar for decades to impose neoliberal, shock therapy, and austerity on developing nations. The New World isn't asking the IMF for a loan in dollars. It's taking a loan in yuan from the NDB. And this brings us to the most profound consequence of America's failed sanctions, accelerated de-dollarization. As we explained, when the US confiscated Russia's reserves, they made the greatest strategic miscalculation of this century. They proved to the world that the dollar was a weapon. And how does the world react to a weapon pointed at its head? It builds a shield. The shield is trade in local currencies. Suddenly, Russia and China no longer needed dollars to trade their oil and manufactured goods. They could use the yuan and the ruble. Brazil and China struck massive deals to trade in real and yuan. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Saudi Arabia is openly considering selling oil to China in yuan. Each of these deals, individually, seems small. But collectively, they are the death by 1,000 cuts to dollar hegemony. They are creating an alternative payment system, bypassing the US-controlled SWIFT system. This means that in the future, when the United States tries to sanction a nation, when Donald Trump tries to bully a country into submission, that nation will be able to simply say, "No, thank you. We will trade through this other system." The empire's most powerful weapon will have become a useless piece of metal. And China? While Trump was obsessed with the bilateral trade deficit, what was China doing? It was executing the Belt and Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. It was building ports in Pakistan and Greece, railways in Africa, 5G networks in Asia. China understood what Trump, in his reality TV mindset, cannot grasp. Power in the 21st century comes not from walls, it comes from networks. While Trump wants to build a wall to keep people out, China is building bridges to get its goods, its technology, and its influence in. Trump's tariffs did not stop China. They just forced China to diversify. They forced China to accelerate its investments in the rest of the world, making it less dependent on the American consumer and more central to the global economy. Once again, a shot in its own foot. And perhaps the most painful, most ironic proof of the multipolar rise comes from the neighbor Donald Trump loves to demonize most, Mexico. For 30 years, Mexico was the laboratory for American neoliberalism. NAFTA, privatization, open markets, the Washington Consensus. The result was wage stagnation, soaring inequality, and state capture by cartels. Then, in 2018, the Mexican people elected Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO. AMLO did the exact opposite of what Washington and neoliberal economists demanded. He rejected austerity. He raised the minimum wage by over 100%. He strengthened the state-owned energy companies, Pemex, oil, and CFE, electricity, which the neoliberal model said he should privatize and sell off. He launched massive social programs and built major infrastructure, like the Maya train, to develop the poor South. According to Trump's logic, according to the IMF's logic, Mexico should have collapsed. But what happened? Mexico's economy is growing faster than that of the United States. The Mexican currency, the peso, has become the super peso, one of the strongest currencies in the world against the dollar. And the supreme irony? Because of Trump's trade war with China, American companies are now fleeing China. And where are they going? They are going to Mexico. The nearshoring phenomenon. Mexico, under a sovereign, left-leaning president who invested in his people and rejected the Washington model, has become the #1 trading partner of the United States, surpassing China. AMLO proved, in practice, that the neoliberal model that Trump and Biden still champion is dead. He proved that sovereignty, investing in your own people, and rejecting submission to Washington are not just morally right, they are economically superior. The silence in Washington about the success of AMLO's Mexican humanism is deafening. Because it is living proof that the emperor has no clothes. And this brings us to Act 4. To the man who personifies this nakedness, Donald Trump. The secret that Richard Wolff and other critical analysts have exposed is that Donald Trump is not the cause of American decline. He is the symptom. He is the ultimate personification of denial. Think of Trump not as a politician, but as a character. What is his function? His function is theater. It is bluster. He is the master of distraction. The American capitalist system, in its late neoliberal phase, failed its working class. It took the manufacturing jobs from the Rust Belt and sent them to China and Mexico, not because Chinese or Mexican workers were evil, but because the CEOs of General Motors, Apple, and Ford could pay poverty wages there and pocket the difference. Profits were privatized for the 1%, while the social pain was socialized onto the workers of Ohio and Michigan. That working class is angry. It has been betrayed. It knows the system is rigged. They needed a scapegoat. The Democratic elite, like Hillary Clinton, offered them a lecture on privilege and called them deplorables. And then came Trump. Trump understood the anger, but his job was not to solve it. His job was to redirect it. He told the working class, "You are right to be angry. But you are angry at the wrong people. The problem isn't the CEO who closed your factory. The problem isn't the Wall Street system that financed that move. The problem is the Mexican immigrant. It's the Chinese product. He gave the betrayed working class a target for their hatred that did not threaten the profit system that Trump himself represents. Trump's secret is that he is the best friend of the very system he pretends to attack. His first and only major legislative act was not an infrastructure plan. It was not a healthcare system. It was a massive tax cut for corporations and billionaires. He rewarded the very same companies that created the Rust Belt. He is the false populist. He uses the rhetoric of nationalism to cover for the practice of the most predatory globalist capitalism. His obsession with the wall is the perfect symbol of this. It is an act of theater. It is a symbol of impotence. He cannot, or will not, stop Apple from building its next iPhone in China. He cannot, or will not, force finance capital to invest in America. That would require a fundamental change to the system of which he is the chief beneficiary. So, instead, he offers a spectacle. He offers a steel wall to stop the desperate Central American worker, who is, himself, a victim of the same imperial exploitation system that destroyed the jobs in the US. It is the symptom, not the cause. The endgame that Wolff identifies is this: the performance no longer works. The tariffs failed. The sanctions failed. The world has changed. Trump's denial, his belief that he can simply intimidate China or Mexico back to 2003, is the final delusion of the empire. He is like an aging magician performing the same old, cheap tricks for an audience that has already seen behind the curtain and knows how the trick works. The world has moved on. The world is building a multipolar system, and Donald Trump is still shouting about who is going to pay for the wall. It is the endgame for the illusion. The change is real. It is inevitable. The American empire is in profound psychological denial, and Donald Trump is the face of that denial. He is the man running full speed off a cliff, refusing to look down, convinced that his own arrogance will keep him from falling. But the viewer, the citizen watching this, you who have watched to the end, you now know the truth. You see the fall coming. You understand what is happening behind the theater's curtain. If this analysis has made you see the world through new eyes, if you understand that there is a struggle for dignity taking place, then do not stay silent. Share this video so that more people can comprehend what the traditional media will never explain.